Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about 2020 and the lack of pop culture around it. I'm Nick.
And I'm Alistair.
And this fortnight, it's our annual end-of-year review episode, in which we look back on the year 2020 in both TV and film, and deliver a bit of chat about the state of things in both areas, followed by our top 5 releases, and an attempt to construct some sort of unified MFV top 3 in each area. And then we'll probably also do our worst release as well, because you can't skip the bad stuff entirely. Yes, we are doing this in the first week of January, and you could say that's a bit late for this sort of thing, but in our defence, last year this came out in March, so take what you can get, I would. And anyway, before that, we'll be talking about Doctor Who, just to give you a little bit of up-to-date 2021 action. And before that, Alistair, have you seen anything else to recommend to the listeners?
Yes, so over Christmas there's been a few releases that have come direct to streaming services. I think this is mainly because there's almost nothing in the cinema right now. But what would have certainly been in the cinema, but what I think was one of the big Christmas releases, is something I can recommend, which is Soul, the new film from Pixar, which is about a sort of struggling jazz pianist and a music teacher who gets his big break, but then tragically passes away, gets sort of stuck in the afterlife and has to work his way back to his body. And it's one of those, Pixar films that it's from the same director as Inside Out that does a really good job of kind of bringing some very abstract concepts to life and tackling some quite big issues, such as, what does it mean to be disappointed with how your life is going, or to have ambition but also to struggle with it, and things like that. So again, it's Pixar managing to make what are some things that are quite emotionally complex, I think, accessible for people of all ages, and as well as some beautiful animation along the way, and a few tear-jerky moments. So if you're looking for something that's just kind of like a good solid Pixar movie, maybe not one of their best ever. I don't think it's quite on the same level as Inside Out or Finding Nemo or The Incredibles or some of their absolute best ones. But I can certainly recommend this as a good family film to watch at some point.
Yeah, I watched this as well. I thought it was fine. It's very nicely animated, and it's hard not to feel some emotion as they go through their lives. I felt like it, I don't know, it's hard to explain, but it felt like it didn't quite go deep enough to really get me. It's one of these films where I end up in the strange position of feeling like I want to complain about not feeling emotionally devastated enough by it. In that I felt the main thing it was going for was to make me feel deeply emotional, and in the end I just sort of felt slightly emotional. Especially with the animation style of the little blue wispy soul monsters. Monsters? They're not monsters, they're people like you and me, except blue and round. The little blue soul creatures. It did remind me quite a lot of Inside Out. And Inside Out, maybe it helped that I saw that in the cinema and could fully immerse myself in it, I don't know. But Inside Out, did do a decent job of ruining me emotionally. I felt very sad when I watched Inside Out. It's a great film, but yes, did successfully make me cry several times, whereas Soul merely made me sniffle a few times. It's nicely enough told, but yeah, I don't know, I felt like it was missing something maybe. I don't know if I ever fully connected with the character enough to really feel his pain. But it is very nicely made, and it's a decent, if not stunning, Pixar film in a year when there have been very few interesting films. So if you want to see it, then go ahead.
Yeah, I think you're right. You'd expect from a film that's about, someone who's been struggling to kind of break through on their creative ambition and then dies just before, realising that ambition, to be really tragic and really sad, or it's, to be about some great revelation. And it kind of, the film does play with those themes and those issues, but I suppose it doesn't quite kind of connect it up. You don't quite feel the full emotional impact of it. As you say, it's not in the same way that Inside Out was able to bring these issues to life. I suppose it is dealing with some quite complex emotions, and addresses them in quite an accessible way, but maybe without fully, I don't know, it all connecting up properly to the point where it has sort of maximum emotional impact.
Well, it's quite a low stakes story, I guess. There is a clock and a thing he's rushing towards, but it never feels really urgent and like it really, I don't know, like his world could collapse on him at any moment. My pulse was very, highly elevated during this film. It feels like a bit of a light straw. But a very beautifully made light straw.
Yeah, absolutely. And it has some very funny cat-based bits as well, which I did appreciate. There's a sort of extended sequence when the main character gets his soul trapped in the body of a cat. I thought, that's got some good cat facial expressions and things like that. It's kind of a sort of easy comedy bit, man gets trapped in the body of a cat and does strange things. But that bit, that's a kind of middle section of the film that was very funny.
Yeah, it's nice that it went through a few phases and had a few different sections to keep things interesting. And yes, some enjoyable cat moments. I somehow didn't see that coming in the few seconds it was set up, even though it was quite nicely done.
Yeah.
But yeah, spoilers, this, although a decent film, is not in my top 5 films of the year.
No, it's not in my top 5 either, but I did enjoy it, and I thought it's nice to get some high-profile releases, because I guess this would have come out at some point in the cinema as their big Pixar film of the year, but obviously that's not happened. Anyway, so that's what I've been up to recently. What have you been up to over the Christmas break, Nick?
Well, I've actually seen a few more films than I usually do, in that I've seen some films. Mostly, to be honest, due to what's available to me on streaming, and also to the fact that the main day I set aside to really, chill out and watch some films was Christmas Eve. And on Christmas Eve, as you may have noticed if you were following me on Twitter, where I was complaining about it incessantly, my internet crashed. So I was forced to dig out my piles of DVDs, which means I finally saw such films as Tropic Thunder, which is a film from many years ago, which I think featured Robert Downey Jr. in his not yet Iron Man state, just prior to his big Iron Man comeback, maybe, alongside Jack Black and someone else famous. Ben Stiller, that's it. It's a Ben Stiller film, of course it is. Yeah, Jack Black and Ben Stiller as 3 movie stars who go to Vietnam to make a Vietnam War movie and end up getting sucked into an adjacent conflict when they get left in the jungle. And it's basically just an extended satire of over-the-top action war movies with the added element of all the actors playing ludicrous parodies of actors, including Jack Black as a guy who's just desperately looking for coke, and Robert Downey Jr. as an incredibly pretentious Australian method actor who, for this film, has gone right ahead and blacked up, which is bizarre. I'm unclear if that will get made today. I'm not sure. The film is very much in no doubt that he is being both ridiculous and offensive. He has various terse exchanges with the actual black people who work on the film, including one of them who keeps following him around making jokes about Australians, which he finds incredibly offensive, yet still fails to get the point. It's an odd film. It's a very silly film. It's an hour and a half well spent if he just wants to laugh at a load of meta action movie jokes. It's one of the many films in this pile which I meant to see at the time and never got around to. So yeah, an up-to-date recommendation for you.
Yeah, sounds good. It came out in 2008, so I think it's the same year as Iron Man. So I think it was literally Robert Downey Jr. just before he, rehabilitated his career, or to the point where he became a household name for acting in action films as opposed to drugs and police chases or whatever. Just looking at it now, it does feel like it's like a different age, even though it's not that long ago, because, I guess like Ben Stiller, Jack Black aren't necessarily the big names they were. I mean, this was definitely at the height of their comedic careers.
This was definitely a Ben Stiller at the age of almost every comedy that came out of Hollywood had Ben Stiller in it.
Yeah, it seems so long ago, but yeah, it seems like to forget like how ubiquitous he was. And he's incredibly funny. And, he's done a lot of good films, like Royal Tenenbaums is like a favourite of mine. He's done quite a lot of bits with Wes Anderson over the years. Yeah, it's weird, kind of weird, almost like the point when that kind of wave of filmmaking ended and the MCU kind of kicked off in 2008. So one of those liminal places.
Yeah, it's silly comedy, I guess, they don't seem to make quite as much of anymore. I'm not quite sure what cinematic comedy looks like at the moment, but it definitely doesn't look like a Ben Stiller film.
No, maybe it's people take the world much more seriously now than they did back then. Yeah, like interesting you say, they probably wouldn't make a film today with a character blacking up in it. From what you say, I haven't actually seen Tropic Thunder, even though it is well regarded as a comedy film. From what you say, it seems like they handle it well. It's not a sort of supposed to be just an offensive joke. It's more of a meta commentary on offensive jokes and pretentious actors.
Well, yeah, Hollywood and its belief that it's its job to handle literally anything, even if it's obviously not their job to handle it.
Yeah.
There's nothing that the white man can't insert himself into.
Yeah, which I suppose is probably, again, relevant for today. That it's not like Hollywood's desire to tackle any issue or to, turn anything into a film hasn't gone away in the intermediate time.
I mean, I guess the sort of ridiculous Rambo-esque action movie they're kind of parodying has gone away a little bit, but I think, to be honest, it was kind of on the way out by the time they made the film, which is probably why they're taking the piss out of it.
Yeah, I suppose a lot of these like spoofs or some meta commentary films, they tend to come along at the end of a wave when you've had like a type of film, and when it gets to the point that the only thing really left in that genre is sort of parody, is the point usually when it's over, such as like The Wild Bunch coming along right at the end of the Western as a genre. Although we did have Extraction this year, which is probably going back slightly to that kind of form of crazy over-the-top action film in which like one man kills a lot of dudes.
Yeah, it's true. Spoilers, Extraction also not in my top 5, although I did enjoy it. Ben Stiller's sort of, a lot of his characters, certainly during this era, were him playing these sort of crazy, pretentious, intense guys. I'm not a number one Ben Stiller connoisseur, but a lot of the characters I've seen him in, like in this and in Dodgeball, and I've surely seen at least one other Ben Stiller movie. We'll have to get back to you on that.
Mystery Men is another one when he plays a similar sort of character.
Yeah, I guess he played a sort of everyman in those Meet the Parents films. But a lot of the times he's playing these ludicrous, self-important, pretentious people who talk like this. And to be fair, he's very good at it there, and he's doing it here, and it's ridiculous. And it was Christmas Eve, and I was wrapping presents and laughing at it in the background. I enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah. Sounds like a great Christmas Eve film.
Yeah, I don't know if it's quite one for all the family. There's quite a lot of jokes that revolve around people getting bloodily murdered, but... Right, and before we launch into last year, let's take a brief stop in this year with Doctor Who Revolution of the Daleks, the 2020 New Year's Day special. Apparently they're now New Year's Day specials, and I'm okay with that if it means they don't have to shoehorn Christmas in quite as painfully as they did in some of the later Christmas ones, in which the Daleks take on a new life as part of the British police force. The Doctor, meanwhile, is in prison. But it's okay because Captain Jack Harkness is back. Alistair, what did you think of this?
So I thought it was fine. Overall, it wasn't one of the best Jodie Whittaker adventures. As you say, it wasn't as clunky as some of the Christmas ones. I mean, the Christmas ones, after a while, did get a bit much from trying to shoehorn in something Christmassy or a connection to Christmas. I think after a while, they just sort of ditched the idea of making it the Christmas specials firmly about Christmas. They just either set them at Christmas or had some tangential connection. But I thought this was fine overall. It wasn't phenomenal, but it wasn't, it kind of wasn't as disappointing as I say I found the end of the previous season, the kind of two-part finale with the Cybermen and on Gallifrey. You can go back to listen to our episode on that, but I was not a fan of that ending. But this one was all right. It kind of had two main stories. I feel to discuss this, we kind of really have to drop some spoilers.
Honestly, trying to remember if anything worth spoiling actually happened.
Yeah, well, the main plot line being, there's one plot line involving the Daleks and one plot line which involves two of the three companions, Ryan and Graham, leaving. The plotline of the emotional build-up to Ryan and Graham leaving was not really connected in any way to the Dalek story. They seemed very much like two parallel stories running next to each other that didn't really intersect, which was unfortunate. But then it was an emotional moment when the departure at the end came, so overall it was fine.
Yeah, it was fine is very much the top line point on mine as well. And it's about the same level as a lot of the last series, although the last series is kind of overshadowed by how bad the finale was. The series up to that, like most of it except for the two-part finale, was also sort of watchably fine. It was an okay, if slightly unremarkable Doctor Who adventure, most of it, and this was another one. It had a few ideas which were interesting. I thought the basic concept of the Daleks being turned into weapons by the cops was, not a bad bit of incisive satire from Doctor Who. I think they could probably have gone a bit further with it, but on the other hand, how much strong criticism of the police am I really expecting from A, a children's show, and B, on the national broadcaster? So... yeah, they hinted at it a little bit. I'd like to think Russell T Davies, if he was still there, maybe would have tried to take a few deeper jabs with that, but I don't know whether he'd have got away with it. And the rest of it was a bit of a standard Doctor Who runaround. It's always fun to see Captain Jack again, even if I didn't feel like he got much to do. Like he had his two bits where he rescued the Doctor and had like one resonant emotional chat with Yaz, and aside from that, he was just kind of there. But he is always a fun presence, even when he's just kind of hanging around. So it's not really a complaint, it's just merely a sob at the loss of potential. I thought maybe the premise of this would be that the Doctor would stay in prison for most of the episode, and Jack would have to like fill in like a substitute teacher, and the Doc would reunite with them at the end, and Jack would just be trying to be the Doctor for the companions. I kind of wish they had gone that way, because it does sound like more fun. I guess if this is the final episode for two of the companions, they didn't want to keep them apart from the Doctor all episode.
Yeah, that would have been interesting to have, Jack as a substitute Doctor, which I suppose is kind of the role he played in Torchwood, his own show. I can see why they wanted to keep the Doctor around the companions. There's a few discussions that kind of build up to Ryan and Graham departing. I did feel those were kind of some of the best bits of the episode. The Doctor sort of miscalculated returning to Earth and has arrived 10 months later after abandoning. Well, the companions feel like they've been abandoned on Earth. Yeah, there was some few bits when the companions sort of confront the Doctor about how their lives have moved on or how they feel sort of abandoned, that have some real emotional resonance. There's some good acting involved, and those scenes were quite poignant, but they felt very much like interludes amongst the Dalek story.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen those sort of beats, as you say, in various Doctor Who episodes before, and this was a fine version of it. I kind of wish they'd, found some courage and killed off one or two of the two leaving companions, because it did just feel like they just sort of wandered off. But even though this show does, in a lot of ways, seem a bit more happy to randomly murder the passers-by than it used to be. That is one thing I quite enjoyed about this, actually. The Daleks had a decent body count, but not companions, apparently. Killing the companions is a bit too far.
I think Doctor Who's always been very reluctant to actually kill the companions. Maybe it's partly because they might want to bring a companion back for like a special at some point or something like that. But I guess maybe they just find it's too much for a children's show to really confront death in such a head-on way.
It's true, both Davis and Moffat did seem to spend quite a lot of time finding ways to get rid of the companions, which were just as sad as killing them, but without actually killing them. I think Bill came the closest to actually dying, and even that was sort of equivocated a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing that a lot of sci-fi shows and things have done over the years, which is a sort of a transcendence rather than a death. So the character sort of leaves this physical plane and is no longer connected to the other characters, but is still very much alive in some other place and probably having a lot of fun.
They did kill a few people in Torchwood, I suppose. In the adult show, you're allowed to kill people.
I think that's kind of the difference. For the grown-up show, I mean, famously, there was like one companion back in the 80s that they did kill, Adric. But and I don't know if it's partly because it's really hard to hit the poignancy that death created again, and also probably the fact that there seems to be an unwritten rule that in the children's show, maybe don't kill off the main characters, as people will get quite upset by it. And even things like they have the Jenna Coleman companion dying and then being resurrected, and a few companions and again also you mentioned Bill, so they've kind of, come close a few times.
Well, yeah, as I say, it feels like they'd have maybe quite liked to take a stab at killing one off, but felt it would be too much of a bummer. Oh well. They did also have to remind us about the Doctor's new secret origin, where she's basically Wolverine or something, but they didn't seem to bang on about it too much, so I'm happy to just ignore that for now.
Yeah, I'm not sure what they're going to do with that. I mean, my objection to that plotline wasn't so much kind of like messing around with the history or the continuity of the Doctor. It was more the fact that it was just handled in such a incompetent way by just kind of huge amounts of a quite dull exposition that didn't seem to like move the plot forward in the finale. I mean, it makes sense that they addressed it in this because from the Doctor's perspective, it's only just happened a mere 19 years ago or something like that, which I guess to the Doctor is nothing. I can see why it would still be weighing on her mind and would still be something that she's thinking about. I'm glad it didn't become the focus of the whole episode. I assume they're saving that as something to dig into with the next series.
I would be surprised if it's not at least fairly heavily involved in the next series, yeah. I'm not sure if I'm looking forward to it, although I do agree the boringness of its execution was the worst part. I'm not super convinced it's an amazing idea and that it adds much that isn't just going to have to be ignored by later writers. Maybe he'll, take the V-Set the Toys option, invite it out himself before he leaves. Who knows? Yeah.
There were some quite nice nods to Alien in this episode that I liked as well. Especially there's a bit when they find this kind of Dalek breeding facility where the Daleks are being cloned, and it kind of looked a bit like a set from one of the Alien films. And there's even a bit when some goo falls down and then a character looks down and then looks up and sees a Dalek. Yeah, and almost a direct nod to the original Alien, which was quite a nice little moment for the fans, or for the people who, I guess, really like Alien, I guess. Remember that specific bit.
I mean, if you like Aliens, Doctor Who's got plenty of them. But yeah, even I, the cinematically illiterate, did spots for the slime falling down and the thing jumping onto his face was probably a reference to Alien.
So yeah, that was a nice moment I felt I wanted to acknowledge. The other thing is, as much as I enjoy, a Dalek adventure, and it's kind of nice that they don't feel the need to have the Daleks as the big villain in the final episode of every season, as they did for a while, I do kind of feel that, we do seem to be getting to the point where we've seen every possible Dalek story that can be told. They're really struggling to come up with new ones. I mean, this one felt quite similar to the Matt Smith World War II Dalek adventure with the Ironsides. Although obviously this one's set present day, it's not a million miles different, and I'm starting to think, is it possible to come up with an original Dalek story? I mean, Moffat said at one point he wasn't going to do Daleks anymore, and I think they got through one season before, for whatever reason, he brought the Daleks back.
I haven't actually spotted the obvious similarities to the World War II Daleks episode, but yes, there are only so many different things you could do with the little pepper pot bastards, but I guess they're not really willing to write them out for a whole episode, even if some of the beats are getting a bit similar. I'm honestly losing track of the number of times that I've heard the Doctor explain to an unknowing human that the Daleks are pure hate.
Yeah, exactly, and they should not be messed around with. Speaking of the Doctor lecturing characters on Daleks, this new American villain they've had in the last series and this one, played by Mr. Big from Sex and the City. I honestly can't remember the character's name because I can just see Mr. Big every time he comes on screen. But he's not particularly interesting or well-developed character that they seem to be quite attached to for some reason.
I mean, it's nice to develop they've got their own characters, I suppose, but yeah, it's a fairly basic Donald Trump joke. Maybe they'll ditch him now that that's no longer topical. Well, he says, in the optimistic hope that in the next few weeks Donald Trump will stop being topical.
Yeah.
But yeah, this was fine. Somewhere in the 6 or 7 out of 10 region. In previous eras, I'd have maybe moaned it was a bit average, but for the current era, this is, to be honest, towards the upper end. So, fine. Yeah, sure. Well done.
Right. Next on the podcast, Nick and I are going to count down our favourite films of the year and then trying to arrive at some consensus of what the MFV top films of the year will be. So this has been, well, an unusual year for film. No one needs to be told that, but it bears repeating because there's been very little released in the cinema. There was a sort of, obviously, the usual wave of Oscar films. There was released in the very early part of the year, which I thought was a better crop than average, with some really, really good films. Things like Little Women, Uncut Gems, Parasite, 1917, Portrait of a Lady on Fire. There was a real spate of kind of great films early in the year. And then obviously cinemas were shut. Even when they were open, people didn't feel comfortable going to them, myself included. And I guess most stuff was viewed through streaming. So it's still been a year of a lot of films were released, but a lot of them not in the cinema. And a lot of the big titles we were excited about haven't been released, like Black Widow. And some have been released but aren't fully available, like Wonder Woman 1984. So it's an interesting year. It will mean that some films have crept into our top 5 that ordinarily wouldn't have got as much attention because there's been less big films. But yeah, it does very much seem like a limbo year between maybe things going back to normal or maybe things changing.
I mean, I guess finally something to talk about in film other than, how about the superheroes? That's mostly because, the concept of dominant genre in film hasn't really advanced much, to be honest. There hasn't really been much in the way of a chance to move on from the superheroes. We've had to move on to the more existential question of, oh shit, is cinema dead? Like, I think film will probably be fine or survive in some form. But, the actual act of physically going to the cinema obviously hasn't done amazingly from the pandemic. Although, my gut feeling is there'll be enough of an appetite for the sense of normality, but they'll probably get at least a decent initial surge whenever they decide to reopen.
I mean, it's an interesting question over whether cinema attendance will bounce back to exactly what it was before. There's never really been an event like this. I mean, during the sort of 1918 flu pandemic, cinema was so much in its infancy. I think other forms like sort of live theatre bounced back quite quickly after that. But then again, they didn't have things like streaming services or even back then television or radio being particularly widely distributed for people to as like an alternative. There's some evidence in past pandemics that people changed their behaviour quite a lot during the pandemic, but then things snap back to normal quite quickly. But there's no guarantee that means people will go back to the cinema, especially if a lot of people have, joined Netflix or Disney Plus or something like that, and basically have been lured away and sort of permanently lured away.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the big thing the cinema is about to fear for a while is that this sort of mental divide that films are things like hour and a half to 2 hour to 3 hour to 5 hour bits of content you specifically have to go to a cinema to watch, rather than just, it's like a streaming TV show, only longer. Yeah. Like, I don't know whether the belief that you, air quotes, should go to the cinema to see a film will somehow take a battering. I mean, it probably does depend on how much, whether it does do any damage to the whole exclusivity thing. Because obviously, having the films before everyone else is still the big thing that cinemas have over streaming services. Although I gather Warner Brothers, at least in America, are taking a bit of a battering ram to that as well.
There's also the element of the kind of the cinematic experience in that, obviously some films are designed to be shown on like a screen way bigger than people have in their homes and, with better quality sound in this kind of immersive experience. So Christopher Nolan this year was fighting really hard to get Tenet into the cinemas because I think he seemed to really want it released this year, but also clearly didn't want it to go straight to streaming because he created something he thought was a spectacle that was best enjoyed in the cinema. And even films like Tenet that have, obviously huge special effects, I can see why they didn't want to release Black Widow in a year when I'm sure their impressive special effects will be much harder to appreciate on a small screen. But there's even things like comedies, dramas. There's something about the cinema which is that it forces everyone to put their phone away, to not be doing something whilst they're watching. It brings people together, so you kind of get this group experience. Like, comedies are funnier when you're with a group of people laughing. Horror is scary when you're with a group of people being scared. Kind of having that communal experience and focused experience is part of cinema.
Part of me hates to be this guy, but large chunks of cinematic audiences are just annoying, though.
Well, in that people don't
do what you just said.
Yeah, they are on their phones or they talk and things like that. Yeah, this might be the sort of the final point when basically one thing this could be is I thought it could be maybe the death of multiplex cinema, in that art house cinema might continue in some way, and that people who really want that kind of communal experience will go to a specific place that probably charges more money. So the fact that if you're going to pay £15 to see a film, everyone's going to put their phone away and shut up and watch it. And and everyone else will go to streaming services because people will realise that like multiplexes can be annoying when people just kind of are on their phones and kind of talking and just running in and out rather than watching the film.
Yeah, it is possible that cinema will become more of a, I don't know, a specialist luxury hobby for film enthusiasts or people who are passionate / snobby about how they see their films. Christopher Nolan and all his friends. Yeah, I did enjoy how Christopher Nolan, as this lovable film purist, his reputation took a bit of a battering this year when it became clear that he's such a lovable film purist. He'd just love for you to go out and die to see his film in the cinema.
Yeah.
Which did seem to get people to turn on him a little bit.
Especially as when the review embargo came down and the reviews, obviously they weren't terrible. Again, spoilers, Tenet is not in my top 5 films of the year.
Spoilers, same.
But yeah, it's not that it was terrible, but there was a bit of a kind of, it's a bit meh. It's probably not as good as like his previous 2 or 3 films. I don't know if I'd be willing to die to see Inception in the cinema, but sadly not willing to die to see the kind of C+ version of Inception.
Yeah, in the event that mass film viewings resume in the middle of coronavirus, and everyone has the film they died to see chiseled into their headstone, I'd feel a bit shit if mine was Tenet, to be honest. I mean, not as bad as I would have done if I died to see New Mutants, but still quite bad.
Yeah. Well, to be fair, if you were stuck in the afterlife watching one film over and over and over, that's probably what it would take to really get your head around the plot of Tenet. You have to see, you'd probably have to be stuck seeing it in infinite loop to eventually to understand it. Either that, or you would finally realise that it does actually make no sense.
Eventually, you get bored and put it on backwards, which of course is also the same as watching it forwards. I don't know. I haven't seen the film, but I don't understand the plot. I've just seen lots of people remarking about how it's the same as the backwards Red Dwarf episode and what happens if you take a dump. Anyway,
moving on as quickly from that as possible.
Yeah, cinema. It'll probably will depend on how much the big film companies hold their nerve on not just dumping their content to streaming. However, they do just wait for cinemas to reopen. So far, it only seems to be Warner Brothers due to their desperation to get people to subscribe to HBO Max, which I'm British, I can't help you guys. I don't have access to your lovely fucking service. But yeah, it seems like, I guess, a lot of people will be watching with interest to see what happens with Warner Brothers films now that they've decided to do that.
Yeah, and they've folded in their DC Universe platform into HBO Max as well, haven't they?
They have, yes. Not that DC Universe was really a huge amount of anything. To be honest, it was a bit weird that they had a DC-focused streaming platform. I really didn't think there were enough hardcore DC fans to pay for like multiple different TV shows to be made just for them. And it turns out there aren't.
No. I mean, Disney also had a similar thing, how this year they were going to release their live-action remake of Mulan in the cinema, and then they sort of bottled it at the last minute, and I think they put it out on cinema and on streaming as well. You had to pay to watch it on Disney Plus on top of your regular subscription fee to Disney Plus, as opposed to in the cinema, I suppose, where you'd only be paying for it once. This did seem to, I remember the time distributors were quite annoyed about this in cinemas, I think partly because they rely on a big Disney film coming out in the summer to really get the box office in. Obviously, Disney films pull in lots of people, parents taking lots of kids in the summer. That was a difficult decision, for a lot of cinemas. I think that it really just depends on whether this is just like a one-off strange year. If the next big Disney film comes out in the cinema, then all is forgotten.
Yeah, I think if we're still here this time next year, sat mostly at home in fear of coronavirus, then yes, the death of cinema might well start to seem alarmingly plausible. But if it does, as some of our more optimistic politicians are saying, end up being, quote, all over by Easter, then maybe we will just sort of swing back to normal.
Yeah. It's interesting how that this was possibly the year we had the least superhero films. Or, I guess, like,
Yeah.
superhero and franchise films. Like, there weren't as many, like, big remakes or adaptations or things like that.
Yeah, as I say, it's been a bit of a nothing year in terms of actual content. I mean, for Marvel, it's amazing how well the pandemic slotted into their schedule, It let them get the big finale out. It even let them release their little epilogue. And then a big gap. To be honest, considering people were just starting to warm up their superhero fatigue, is it real? Editorials again after Endgame. Yeah, fair play for Marvel. A few months off will probably do them well. Well, a few months off, about a year and a half off in the end, will probably do them well. They can come back and instead of being, oh god, yet more, they said they were ending it and they haven't stopped, it'll be like this joyous return to normality. Everyone will just be happy to see them.
Yeah, that's most likely. It could be the, a real sort of zeitgeist defining moment. The fact that like people go like, remember normality, remember when a big superhero film came out. That might be the thing that reminds everyone that life is returning to normal.
The Black Widow movie is out. That means everything's okay.
Yeah, I mean, it could be, one of those sort of, huge moments of relief. Obviously, Marvel must be very happy that they put out Infinity War before all of this happened. So yeah, they kind of squeezed that out, and then had a nice break. And in the meantime, it's not really like anything else has kind of emerged to take the place. It's not no sort of cinematic movement or anything seems to have taken advantage of this gap to the void that the lack of superhero films has created to fill it with something else. I guess it takes time to make films, and production has also been hampered by COVID, which is why there's so few films that actually are directly addressing COVID, because it's been kind of impossible to make them. But yeah, it does feel like, kind of film has sort of stalled a bit in the meantime.
Yeah, I mean, Netflix have done okay, like really working to establish themselves as the home of the B-list film, the B-movie, I guess, that's what we call them. The sort of all-rights film that you go and see once you've seen the big films and you still want to go to the cinema. Or the sort of film you just wait and watch on Netflix anyway. So, yeah, good for them, I guess. I'm assuming they're going to try and keep that going. The sort of okay mid-budget film starring like one person you've heard of and a bunch of others.
Yeah, I think things like Project Power or Enola Holmes would have definitely got cinema releases based on the sort of the caliber of their cast, but obviously just went straight to Netflix and maybe got some more attention than they would have otherwise, in that they were actually big name films with big name film stars in them that were coming out this year, even though they were direct to Netflix, because there were a lot less of them. Maybe Project Power got to have its moment a little bit more than it would have otherwise.
I'm not convinced Project Power had that big a moment. We watched it because Netflix kept recommending it, but I didn't see anyone else mention it.
No. Or maybe or Enola Holmes or something like that.
But yeah, I think others have benefited. I think Old Guard probably landed a bit harder than it would have done if it had just plopped out in a normal year. And maybe similar for Extraction, to be honest.
We'll just have to wait and see what happens next year. There were some highlights this year, and I was able to pull together, I think, a serviceable top 5 that I'm happy with, as, a slate of 5 really good films that I would strongly recommend to anyone to see.
Same, although my list is quite lucky that a few of last year's Oscar contenders and this year's blockbusters managed to plop out before the pandemic hit. The number of post-pandemic films in my top 5 is not super high. Anyway, let's not spoil it too much. Right, who wants to go first?
Shall I go first with my first film?
By which you mean your 5th film?
It's my first of the reading, the 5th of the order. Just to be number 5. My 5th favourite film of the year is Portrait of a Lady on Fire, which was absolutely excellent. This was the last film I saw in the cinema before the coronavirus really hit. I saw it on Leap Year Day, the 29th of February this year. I'm so glad I really made the effort to go see this film because it's absolutely beautiful. I really, really recommend it. And yeah, it was nice to have that memory with me throughout the year of not going to the cinema. To briefly describe it, it's set in the 18th century in France. It's a French film. It's about a woman who's sent to the house of this other wealthy woman to paint a portrait of her, which will be showed to her suitors for marriage. Through the process of painting the portrait, the two women fall in love, and it's a really beautiful, sort of tender, queer love story that I highly recommend.
Yep, I heard this was really good. I did get as far as searching my streaming services to see if I could see it on any of them on my subscriptions before we made this list, but I couldn't, so I haven't seen it. But I have heard it's really good. Okay, my number 5 film. Having said everything I said a second ago, this is actually a film that came out this year. Number 5 for me is Da 5 Bloods from Netflix. This year's Spike Lee movie about a bunch of Vietnam veterans who return to Vietnam to both recover the body of their friends and look for some gold that they left in the area. And this is notable both for being one of this year's big films about black identity set against, of course, this year's Black Lives Matter resurgence, and for being one of the last performances by Chadwick Boseman, who's really good in this, and of course sadly is no longer with us. Yeah, I really enjoyed this. It's maybe slightly ponderous, but it's very thought-provoking in its use of real footage alongside the live action stuff. All the performances are really good, but as well as Chadwick Boseman, there's also Delroy Lindo as the inevitable unstable, slightly arseholey one of the group, who provides a nice tension element that sort of hovers throughout the whole thing. So yeah, this is really good. It's on Netflix. If you haven't seen it, recommend it. Yeah,
I really like this film as well. It was one of the highlights of the year. It just narrowly missed out on being in my top 5. It was, also really sad that Chadwick Boseman passed away this year. He's definitely going to be missed, and this is, he's excellent in this film. But yeah, also Spike Lee, director I really liked, been following his work for a while, and this was, one of his sort of great sort of angry films. I felt he really had something to say both about Vietnam and about America today, which really contributed to the film. Yeah, and some great all-round performances. You mentioned Delroy Lindo, who was excellent. Also, I thought good performance from Jonathan Majors, who was mainly this year in Lovecraft Country, but had a good supporting role playing the Delroy Lindo character's son, and they had a good, tempestuous father and son relationship.
Yeah, he's good at this as well. We covered Lovecraft Country. It's not in my top 5 TV shows, but he's much better in this.
So number 4, my fourth favourite film of the year, was a direct-to-streaming release. It's Trial of the Chicago 7, Aaron Sorkin's second directorial film, starring Eddie Redmayne, Sacha Baron Cohen, Jeremy Strong, Mark Rylance, Joseph Gordon-Levitt. The list goes on. Michael Keaton, many other well-known actors. About a group of activists who were organising a protest against the Vietnam War and ended up as a sort of iconic 1960s trial. It's a courtroom drama, something Aaron Sorkin has done before and is excellent at. And also, I really felt this film had something to say not only about the politics of the 1960s in Vietnam, but also the politics of today, including police brutality and the right to free speech and free protest. So this film was very timely released and received, and I thought absolutely excellent.
Yep, obviously we love a good Aaron Sorkin film here on Moderate Fantasy Violence, despite the fact that they feature very little moderate fantasy violence. But yeah, this is, I think we always say this, but probably one of his best ones since The Social Network, in terms of actually fitting into his style without letting it just overpower everything, and feeling like it actually had something to say without being too preachy, and providing all the actors with a good platform to do their thing on. So this was really enjoyable. It's always nice to have him in the mix somewhere.
Yeah. No, definitely. As a screenwriter, I've really admired for a while. It's good to see him do, just a great film.
Okay, and my number 4, because obviously we had to get a superhero film in there somewhere. My number 4 film this year is Birds of Prey, and I think it's The Fantabulous Emancipation of One Harley Quinn, but forgive me if I stumbled over the subtitle there. And this was the one superhero film that actually had a relatively conventional cinema release this year, I think, that actually, came out in the cinema at a time when we could all go to the cinema. And thankfully it was really good. This is Margot Robbie's Harley Quinn teaming up with a bunch of other female superheroes to go on a sort of chaotic adventure searching for a MacGuffin. Well, I think technically running away from other people, trying to get the MacGuffin off them. I think the director described it as a girl gang movie, and it does very much have that sort of silly, righteous camaraderie going on, which just makes it very entertaining to watch. It's quite silly, but at least it knows it's silly and it's having fun with it. So this was a really enjoyable film, and something that at least had a bit of a different edge in the superhero film area for this year.
I really enjoyed this. It was nice to see a superhero film in the cinema this year. It really kind of got the balance of being funny and having some good action scenes in it, which is generally the formula that Marvel have done very well up until now, but this was kind of the best DC film for doing that. Kind of mixing the action, the comedy, to the point when it was both very funny but also had some good action, and the one did not detract from the other. They balanced each other very well.
And I think it had a nice edge of slightly raunchy silliness that made it not seem just like a copy of a Marvel film. So I enjoyed it.
So moving on to number 3, my third favourite film of the year was Little Women, which came out right at the beginning of the year, back in January, starring Saoirse Ronan, Timothée Chalamet, Florence Pugh, Emma Watson, amongst others. Film adaptation of the beloved book, directed by Greta Gerwig, who's done some interesting films. Lady Bird, I certainly can recommend. And this film was just full of so much warmth and life. Care and attention is taken to bring to life the 4 central female protagonists. You really get quite invested in their characters. Their kind of sibling relationship works really well. You really believe in them as kind of like a family. So the trials they go through whilst waiting for their father to return from the Civil War. There's some teary bits, some uplifting bits. The performances are exceptional. They really got some great people across the board. Florence Pugh is definitely a rising star. I think a lot of people are paying attention to. This film is just one of those great little slices of cinema.
I really love this film as well. I saw it in February. It made me do multiple cries, which, as I mentioned during the Soul review, is very much an easy win for me. And it's just a very involving, intense film to watch. It very much keeps you on the hook for all the characters, which is impressive when there are this many of them, and presents you with this sort of beautiful rolling scenery to look at while these characters go through their harrowing emotional journeys. And this would have been on my list, but I thought it came out in 2019. I'm still not entirely sure when it did come out. But whatever, it's a great film. Consider it an honorary member of my list. I know that we're in a bit of an ambiguous area here, because half of these films came out in the US in 2019 and the UK in 2020.
Yeah, actually, when you said that, I definitely saw it in 2020, but I'm trying to think actually when was its UK release, if it was actually this year or last year. It definitely came out in the US last year. It is, possibly a slightly ambiguous one. I liked it enough that I'm going to declare it a 2020 film, even if I'm wrong.
Yeah, why not? 2020 could use all the help it could get. And yeah, my number 3 for 2020 is one we've already mentioned. It was The Trial of the Chicago 7, because as an Aaron Sorkin fan, and since I haven't got a Spider-Man film to mention this year, it's good to have another one of my favourites back on screen and on form. And as I think I said, we reviewed it. My Aaron Sorkin fandom is such that I can sometimes just listen to his dialogue and feel basic happiness, but I'm pretty sure this was actually a decent film as well, so it's good to have one of those.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those films also that people have been in touch with me to say this film is really, really good. It seems to have penetrated out to people who are just interested in the discourse or in modern politics or political history. This seems to be, in a year when things that aren't about the pandemic haven't really struck a chord, this film did seem to strike a chord.
Yeah, though I have seen people who aren't members of the Aaron Sorkin fandom, like people who would probably just usually ignore the new Aaron Sorkin film, actually mention seeing and liking this.
Yeah, and I hope he does continue to direct more films, actually, because his directing is good, considering someone who's primarily known as a screenwriter. He's also turned into quite a good director. Okay, moving on, number 2. Second favourite film of the year. Yeah, it was really hard to choose what I want as number 1 and number 2, but I'm quite happy with how this list is shaken out. Probably my second favourite film of the year is Uncut Gems, a rare Adam Sandler doing a dramatic role. A film about Adam Sandler is a diamond dealer or rare gems salesman in New York who is perpetually borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, mortgaging this, borrowing against that, selling that back, and also gambling and generally being reckless. This film is really, really tense to the point it actually becomes quite stressful and almost unpleasant. It's a bit of a roller coaster you go on with this guy and his completely chaotic life that you kind of get completely sucked into watching this film. It's utterly captivating. Adam Sandler does a great performance. It goes to show that he is very talented, especially when he wants to act. Yeah, this was one of those films that you just had to see. It was utterly captivating.
Yeah, this is my number 2 as well. In fact, based on dates and knowledge, I'm pretty sure we're going to be somewhat in lockstep for these last 2 places. But yes, this was a really good film. It was, as Alistair said, at times more of a stressful than enjoyable experience to watch, but it's definitely beautifully executed, this sort of headlong rush into just disaster. One of these films where you could see the lead character is clearly about to do something stupid and self-destructive, and you're just sitting there going, no, don't do that, don't. Even though he's clearly going to. It's just one of these expertly filmed portraits of a self-destructive idiot. A bit like a portrait of a lady on fire, I suppose, only different. And maybe not always a pleasant experience to watch, but really good. And the soundtrack is also amazing, by the by. As I think I said when we mentioned it on the podcast before, I've got a lot of use out of it as writing music because it's just very soft yet intense.
Yeah, I've been listening to the soundtrack quite a bit. So yeah, definitely. It's got a really distinctive sort of odd synthy soundtrack. Interesting also, they have Kevin Garnett playing himself. One of the things about this is that one of the main characters is, Kevin Garnett, who's a basketball star. It's set about 10 years ago, and they've spent a lot of time going through Kevin Garnett's basketball games so they could use the games in the film. There's various bits when Adam Sandler is betting on the games that he's playing so that they can cut back and forwards from the film to the actual guy playing the actual basketball, and it really, really works. I saw an interview with the Safdie brothers, Josh and Benny Safdie, who made this film, and they did say, they spent absolutely ages watching through mid-aughts basketball games. They're spending hours trying to get all the exact right shots from the right angle, the right colours and everything to make it work. So I think a lot of effort went into making this film, but it really shows.
Yeah, it's impressive because the camera sort of sways around quite chaotically, which is one of the reasons it's quite stressful to watch, but it is very precise as well. You get the feeling.
Yeah. So, the moment we've all been waiting for.
The number 1, which I think might be both of our number 1s.
I think I'd be very surprised if we haven't chosen the same film as number 1. But yeah, I believe the number 1 film of the year is Parasite.
Correct.
Excellent. This is, my favourite film of the year. I sometimes feel this is like a film that ticks absolutely every box for me. It's a political satire about poverty and inequality in modern Korea. What they have to say is relevant to any wealthy country in the world about the rich-poor divide. It's quite scary at moments, but it's also really funny. It's got great performances. It sort of moves from one to the other. It was directed by Bong Joon-ho, who's done some great films that I've really enjoyed over the years. Yeah, this was just a joy to watch.
Oh yeah, same, obviously. My number 1 too, and it's one of those films that pops genres quite nimbly and yet never gets far away from its central point about, wealth inequality and how shit it is, but it portrays it through a range of means, from genuinely sad, pathos-ridden drama to this sort of mocking comedy to, towards the end, surprisingly intense horror. I think I compared it at the time to, one of the good episodes of Inside Number 9, and yeah, I still hold to that. It's a great film. It's on, I think, Amazon Prime now. You can actually just see it on the standard Amazon Prime subscription, and if the mood strikes you, I would definitely recommend it. I know it's very much a standard recommendation at this point, having won Best Picture and I think Best many other things at various award ceremonies, but yes, this was, for America, the best film of 2019, and for Brits, I think the best film of 2020, helped by the lack of subsequent competition.
Yeah, and it's really worth pointing out that how unusual it is for like a foreign language film to win the Best Picture Oscar, so it really goes to show there is something, this film really has something about it. It's completely surprising throughout. As you watch the film, it goes in twists. Whatever you think's about to happen is not what happens. It always managed to surprise you. It always managed to throw you in some new direction, which is one of the things that makes it so gripping to watch.
Well, yeah, I think it very much works as a sort of mainstream comedy drama in a way that's very accessible. Love this film.
Yeah.
So, the MFV top 3 this year, it's not going to be our hardest negotiation, is it?
No. So, obviously we had number 1 and number 2 we agreed on, so that sorts that out. In terms of number 3, we both put Trial of the Chicago 7.
Yeah, I think that's the other film that's in both of our lists, isn't it? So, is that number 3?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, that was easy. Yep, there we go. Aaron Sorkin fans come to easy consensus over including Aaron Sorkin film at number 3.
It was a good film this year, and I think it deserves to be in the list. So yeah, just to recap, Parasite is our favourite film of the year, Uncut Gems number 2, and Trial of the Chicago 7 number 3.
Okay, and now time for the bad one, the shit
worst
one,
film
the
of the
bottom of the list. The worst film of the year. Due to the lack of cinema and the lack of will to do anything I didn't want to do, I really have not watched many bad films out of a feeling of obligation this year, so this was not a hotly contested category.
Yeah, I also actually kind of struggled to find something. Nothing jumped out straight at me. It was like, God, that was the absolute turkey. I think partly because, a lot of things were held back. And also partly for the podcast, we don't go and watch things that generally have been just universally panned, because what are we going to say about it other than everyone thinks it's bad and it's bad? Unless they're films of such sufficiently high profile that we feel they have to see them just for the completeness of what we're covering this year. So, for example, a film like Batman versus Superman. But generally, we don't go out our way to seek out bad stuff, which meant, even though this is the worst film of the year, it's definitely a lot better than previous worst films of the year, such as Batman v Superman or The Crimes of Grindelwald and things like that. But the time has come to unveil probably the film that, certainly looking back on it, I felt was kind of one of the most deeply disappointing films of the year. It's one that was already mentioned briefly, and yeah, my probably worst film of the year was Project Power.
Yeah, again, we're in lockstep. We've seen few enough films that we're basically agreeing on everything. Good work.
Yeah.
It's mediocre. It's not even interesting enough to talk about why it's bad at any length, because it's not even that bad. It's just tedious.
Yeah. It's one redeeming thing is it did have some interesting visuals. It probably would have looked better in the cinema, but obviously we didn't see it in the cinema. But it's just a fairly flat film. I mean, don't even watch it. Just forget about it.
Yeah, no, this is not a film to go and study its mistakes. This is not an interesting failure. It is not interesting in any way. It is just a tedious bad film with a couple of decent actors in it being completely wasted. Don't bother.
Slightly bum note to end what's been a bum year in the cinema, I suppose.
Yeah, and on that glorious note, but see the good films. We've listed a load of good films. See them.
Yeah. Right. That's film done. Now on to TV. So we're going to repeat the process with our favourite TV shows of the year. Obviously, this has been a maybe slightly bum year for film, but I suppose it's been a good year for TV in that I don't think I've ever watched this much TV in 1 year. There's obviously been sat at home a lot of the time. TV has been one of the things that's been available. And I think overall, it's fairly obvious thing to say that we live in an age of premium TV, and there has been a lot of good stuff out this year.
Well, yeah, unlike film, TV chat hasn't, changed completely for the new year. We're still very much in the early years of the old streaming wars. I felt like it's been a bit of a slow year. I don't know if that's the COVID and people not being able to film as much stuff. Obviously, some big series haven't been able to come back. Or maybe it's just that, we haven't really found our new post-Game of Thrones consensus show that everybody seems to watch. So, yeah, it's been a bit of a weird, scattered year for me. There have been lots of bits and bobs I've quite enjoyed and a few returning shows that have come back. maybe not many things that have felt like big, exciting bandwagons.
I think the biggest impact of COVID has been probably on filming schedules, and it has meant that stuff hasn't come out. It might weirdly actually have the biggest impact next year when stuff that just wasn't filmed this year isn't coming out. So there's a lot of skipped seasons. I mean, we've already talked about how there wasn't a Euphoria this year, despite the success of the first season the previous year.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a few. When we got towards the end of the year, it probably had a bit of an impact. Like, I think most of the American network shows that usually run September to Christmas, I don't think a lot of them came back. Like, I know all the Flash Arrow superhero universe stuff isn't starting until January, February. But I think in general, it's gotten more and more pronounced as we got back. Like, I don't think there have been that many big name TV drops, except for like The Mandalorian in the last quarter of the year.
No. And also, they're usually at this point really heavily trailering the big sort of releases for the early parts of the year. Similar to film having usually a lot of high profile films get released in January, February, when people are interested in going to the cinema when we're not really having fun outside. At the same time, they drop TV series in the new year. People are, they're past Christmas. They're not really out having fun, whereas we've been in the past, they're in watching TV. And it doesn't sound like there's any big TV releases coming in the near future or like new series of things coming out.
I think American production has been ramping back up for a while, so I'm sure it'll resume. And as I say, I think it hasn't changed the landscape entirely. I think what's happened before is still happening, just a bit slower. We're still in the sort of early years of the streaming wars, as we've been saying for years, although it's sometimes difficult to provide meaningful coverage of that as a British podcast, as we don't get half of them. Disney Plus has managed to launch fairly strong over here, and aside from that, yeah, who knows. I gather HBO Max is struggling a bit, but I personally have no participation in that race, as I cannot get it.
Yeah, I think Peacock and HBO Max had deals with Sky, so all their stuff just goes to Now TV.
Oh, Apple TV. You can get Apple TV here. They finally actually have a couple of shows I might consider watching if it ever gets very cheap or free, or I somehow have a free year. Like, isn't that Ted Lasso thing meant to be good?
Yeah, there was a new Werner Herzog documentary about meteors that they released on Apple TV that did look spectacular. They're doing a TV adaptation of Foundation.
Oh God, are they?
Yeah, which I do really want to see. So yeah, Apple TV does have some interesting stuff coming out. They've not had anything that's particularly zeitgeisty, the thing that everyone's talking about. At least not yet. Like Disney Plus have had The Mandalorian in their launch year.
Yeah.
Plus also getting Hamilton as well.
Yeah, Ted Lasso has been the main thing that people have talked about on my Twitter, which I think is a sort of uplifting sitcom in the sort of Parks and Recreation vibe, which I guess is very much what people are after this year. But yeah, they seem to have got it partly from this Ted Lasso show on Apple TV, which occasionally I have felt a shred of FOMO for and thought, maybe I should watch that. And they have got things which you'd think I might be interested in, but no one seems to be that buzzing about. Like, there's a new show from Ron Moore, the guy who made Battlestar Galactica, which is, For All Mankind, which I haven't heard that much buzz about in any direction, to be honest, so I assume it's all right. But yeah, nothing has yet pulled me into actually getting Apple TV.
The thing about having lots of streaming platforms is that I think, if anything, it's been the year of Mo rather than a year of FOMO. I mean, talking to people about film and TV, there's been a few shows that have captured the zeitgeist or whatever, or just these things that have been discussed on Twitter, and you sometimes talk to a friend and they would just be like, oh, not watching that, I don't have X platform. The most obvious one is you talk to people about The Mandalorian and people are like, yep, not watching that, don't have Disney Plus. And for a while, when Netflix was completely dominant, it did feel almost like everyone could be a part of the conversation about TV. It would be like, oh, there's this on Netflix, we should all be watching it. But now there's people go like, yeah, I would like to watch The Mandalorian, but I'm not paying for another subscription platform, so I'm just going to pass.
I've been surprised by how many people are also watching The Boys, but I guess a lot of people had Amazon Prime anyway. That seems to have still got fairly good penetration, I guess is the term. Yeah, I think we are hitting a certain age of I can't be bothered to subscribe to any more of these, which I think maybe one of the reasons HBO Max aren't becoming the global sensation they kind of hoped to. Like, they haven't really got anything massively iconic that everyone has to see. Never mind, they have got the Snyder Cut coming soon, so that'll change everything. Yeah, I don't know. I think people are mostly happy as they are. I mean, Disney Plus have done okay because they own everything, and Netflix are doing okay partly because they have a big existing audience and partly because due to sheer volume of content. If you subscribe to Netflix for a couple of months, they'll probably eventually release something you want to watch.
Yeah, they very much have the dominant position. Most people signed up with them. They've got a huge range of content that people want to watch. Obviously, Disney have the starting advantage of having all the Disney content, but again, what's new? A lot of people I know who've had children have just gone straight to Disney Plus as well because they thought, like, just to get some peace and quiet.
Yeah, I mean, if anything, Disney Plus is presumably just going to start rolling up momentum even harder once they actually get to release all these shows they've been trying to release for about 2 years. You know, if not for the pandemic, we'd probably be in ankle deep in weekly Disney shows and weekly Marvel shows at this point, but alas, we're going to have to wait at this point, another couple of weeks before WandaVision starts.
Yeah, 2021 could be the year of Disney Plus, when they actually more of their original content starts to hit.
It's going to be interesting, if nothing else, to come back and see if we are talking about how Disney Plus completely crushed everything. Or maybe they're going to be the water cooler thing that everyone watches. I don't know. Certainly, I imagine on the subset of my Twitter feed, they may well be.
Yeah, definitely the Marvel shows, especially now we've not had Marvel films for a while. Maybe we're missing the MCU a bit, does mean that there'll be new Marvel content soon and TV, so that's definitely going to get a lot of attention. I guess a lot of it will come down to how good it is. The trailer for WandaVision looks really interesting and unusual, but we've got to see what the execution is like. You know, and I think one of the reasons why people have talked about The Mandalorian a lot this year is that it has been good and been entertaining. And obviously Baby Yoda is very cute. But I think you have to have that kind of quality to survive. And one of the reasons why Netflix does well is that there is a lot of quality shows on there, especially if you're willing to dig into the more obscure ones.
Yeah, I think Netflix has a certain breadth, and Disney, although I'm sure they'll do fine, as you say, due to a combination of the guaranteed geek money and the guaranteed family money. I don't know. It does sometimes feel like you're just paying for something quite generic. But then again, that is, I guess, what pays. But yeah, as ever, I'm kind of interested in something a bit more new and interesting, and this year I don't feel like I've quite found it. It's possible that it's just waiting for the pandemic to end. I mean, last year's TV chart was dominated by me pointing out that this was such an amazing year that a lot of good stuff was a bit lower than you'd expect. That is kind of less the case this year, especially if we're looking at my complete top 10. There are definitely items towards the bottom of that, which I think would have dropped off the bottom last year.
Yeah, it was quite easy to pull this list together. There wasn't quite as much jostling to get on the list that didn't make it, although there were a few high-profile shows that I enjoyed that haven't made the top 5.
Yeah, mild spoilers / honourable mentions. I mean, you'll already know my top 10 if you read the list on the website, but The Queen's Gambit dropped off the bottom of my top 10 at the last minute. Good show, not good enough. Anyway, now we're talking about chart numbers, it's probably a good time to get to the charts.
Yep.
Okay, number 5 on my TV top 5 of the year is a show that we loved, a show that was on Netflix and will not be anymore. It's Teenage Bounty Hunters, the new series this year about 2 teenage girls who trip and fall into the world of bounty hunting and discover that to their surprise they're actually all right at it, and then to their equal surprise discover that their family is housing a number of dark secrets. It's a really good, really fun show. I was actually very surprised how much I enjoyed this, although it's from the makers of My Beloved Orange is the New Black, so maybe it's not that surprising. But anyway, yeah, this was really good, and I really liked it, and it was one of my exciting discoveries of the year. It was then, of course, immediately cancelled. Cheers, Netflix. Love the breadth of content. I'm getting a bit annoyed by how keen you are to kill things after 1 or 2 years if they don't immediately catch on.
Yeah, this was also my 5th favourite TV show of the year. So
more consensus.
More consensus, more dreaded consensus. I agree with everything you just said. I really enjoyed this show. It's very funny. It's got great characters. The chemistry between the 2 sisters, Sterling and Blair, and obviously the actresses, Maddie Phillips and Angelica Bennett-Fellini, is really what makes the show. They do some great performances together. You really believe in their dynamic, and that's kind of what you're very much there for. There's a few emotional twists and turns along the way, and yeah, it's one of those shows I just would recommend to anyone to watch.
Annoyed though you will be when you find that it ends on a cliffhanger which will never be resolved.
That is very, very much annoying. Especially as, we were talking about Doctor Who and how the finale of the last series was a bit of a disappointment. This is one of these shows when actually the finale is probably the best bit. It does really build to a great ending.
Yeah, it definitely gets better as it goes. If you watch the first couple of episodes and thought, so watch the rest of it, go on. It gets really, really good by the end. And then, again, you will never find out what happens next. But never mind. Anyway, that was number 5. At number 4 then, Better Call Saul, the Breaking Bad prequel. This year, it's turned out to be the penultimate season of this show, and I think they're doing a strong job of raising the stakes for that. Previous years, I've sort of felt that the crime part of the story, the sort of Gus, Mike section, is sort of jogging on the spot a bit, waiting for its chance to do something, while the important stuff happens in the lawyer section. But this year, the lawyer stuff has come to a bit of a head, and what's his name? Jimmy McGill is now out there being Saul Goodman as a crime lawyer. The 2 parts of the plot are coming together, and I think we're finally building to something. Whenever they get to film season 6, I did Google this actually, I think it's about to finally happen in the early part of next year. Whenever they get series 6 out, we're going to see whatever the end is. I'm very excited by this.
Yeah, I love the show. It's been a consistent favourite of mine since they started. Yeah, it's just, there's a real intensity to it. I mean, it's not the sort of same intensity that Breaking Bad had. It's very much its own show. It's got its own sort of set of characters, its own conflicts, that are going on. And there's just something that's so watchable about it, even when they do these kind of long process montages. And, for example, long shots of Saul walking through the desert, as one episode pretty much was this time, but it's still completely captivating. So I can't wait till they do their final series. So now it's time for my fourth favourite TV show of the year, which was, we've discussed it already, The Mandalorian, that dropped 2 seasons this year in the UK, because I guess we got Disney Plus late and we got last year's Mandalorian season, especially when taken together as a complete 2-season package that has a kind of the complete plot arc of the Mandalorian finding Grogu / Baby Yoda and then delivering him safely across the whole thing, including lots of twists and turns on the way and lots of spectacular action sequences and some very entertaining fights with stormtroopers, dark troopers, space battles, everything that you love from Star Wars. Not very much Jedi mysticism. So yeah, it was just really nice chunk of Star Wars. The Star Wars fan / child in me was very happy with this.
Yeah, I think we've covered this pretty comprehensively in like the last 2 episodes, but yeah, I also watched and enjoyed this, even if I'm not quite as much enough of a hardcore Star Wars fan to put it in my top 5 or indeed my top 10. It was bubbling under next to the Queen's Gambit. But yeah, this was a fun thing to watch this year. Definitely provided that Star Wars feeling while the cinemas were closed. And yes, in my next spot, number 3 for the year, in a year where a lot of people I know seem to retreat to fun sitcoms or silly comedy dramas to provide some light relief to the world outside, number 3 is a show which seemed to epitomise that for a lot of people I know. It's Schitt's Creek, the series about a rich family suddenly losing their fortune due to tax irregularities and having to relocate to a small town where they live in a motel and have to come to terms with their newfound status in life. This is a sitcom which has, I believe, won about 7 Emmys or something crazy like that at the Emmy Awards this year. It's been going for a few years and steadily gathering buzz as it goes. Me and my partner finally decided to watch it since we were stuck indoors just as the final season dropped in the early part of the year, which means it does qualify for this list happily. And yeah, it's a great show. It maybe takes, like a lot of sitcoms, the first season or most of the first season to bed in, but once it does it, it's surprising how it pulls off the twin balance of most of the jokes come from the fact that the characters are awful, and yet also by the end of it you feel a massive emotional attachment to them. It's very, very nicely done. It's a very sort of sweet, funny, redemptive journey, and yes, it's a great show. It probably deserves the piles of praise that have been heaped upon it.
Yeah, it's an interesting choice. I have not seen this show. It gets talked about a lot. I don't really have any excuses for not watching it. One of the things I think is most interesting about it is that it's got Eugene Levy, who's a great comedy actor, most probably well known for being Jim's dad in American Pie, but it stars, is it both Eugene Levy and his son Daniel Levy as a father and son?
Yeah, I think Daniel Levy is both one of the leads and the sort of showrunner, main writer guy. Yeah, it's kind of his show.
Yeah, they're very interesting dynamic, and obviously, yeah, Eugene Levy's a great comedy actor, so he's done a lot of good stuff over the years.
As I say, it seems to have very much taken its place in the culture, especially this year. Like, the number of people I know who watched Schitt's Creek this year is immense, and yes, you should join them, Alistair.
Good stuff. Well, something to get stuck into for 2021. Moving on, my third favourite TV show of the year. It's a TV show that we've already mentioned. It's The Queen's Gambit, starring Anna Taylor-Joy as a chess prodigy who is battling her drug addiction and alcoholism whilst also getting sucked up into the 1960s chess rivalry between the US and Soviet Russia. So this was, I think, something of a dark horse this year, that it wasn't a kind of expected to be a very, very high profile show, but it's become, I think, one of the most watched things on Netflix, certainly this year. I really enjoyed it. I kind of watched most of it over the course of one weekend. Usually I don't binge things that much. I kind of move between shows, watch them over periods of time, unless we're trying to really rush through something very quickly for the podcast. But it's rare that I kind of sit and watch something just consistently, episode back to back to back to back. But yeah, this is one of those shows I just couldn't stop watching.
Yeah, I've also seen this, although because I watched it quite a long time after it was released, we didn't get to review it. I thought it was one of the best made shows of the year. I thought it was maybe a bit standard and predictable by the end. I felt like the best stuff is very much in the first half. But yeah, it was definitely incredibly beautifully made, and it's, if nothing else, going to be a big sort of star-making turn for Anya Taylor-Joy, I imagine. I feel like this has probably marked her as one of the big actors of the moment, and I'll be surprised if she isn't an official confirmed megastar within a couple of years. So yeah, it's on Netflix, and yes, it's good fun. It's not in my top 10, but it is a very enjoyable show. It was, as I said earlier, bubbling under with The Mandalorian. Alright, oh shit, are we at number 2? I think we're at number 2.
Yep, final few.
Number 2, ooh, interesting to see how in lockstep we are this chart as well. Number 2 for me was The Boys, the violent superhero show by Amazon Prime, based on the comic by Garth Ennis and Derek Robertson. I was actually surprised to find this ranked as high as it did in my thinking when I was, sitting down to contemplate my TV thoughts for the year. But I couldn't quite get past the notion that this was the show that stuck with me the most. And, well, one of them. Obviously, it's number 2, not number 1. It was one of the shows that stuck with me the most and which I looked forward to most to watching and felt most weirdly relevant and weirdly, coiled and sharp and in tune with the times. Even though it is a show based on a comic, which I think is kind of fun but silly, cheap thrills, and even though it is, yes, a show about military hardmen beating up superheroes, it shouldn't work as well as it does, but on whatever weird level, even if some of it was just in my head, they seemed to really tune into something this year, and this show became weirdly compulsive for me.
This show just narrowly missed out on being in my top 5. It's really hard to choose between this and Teenage Bounty Hunters, and I think I just came on just slightly preferring Teenage Bounty Hunters, but I thought this show was great. It's dark, but it's also funny. It's very, very violent, but it also, I think, has something to say about media and politics in America right now. I mean, something that's about superheroes who are also a media empire. There's some genuinely intense performances, some really threatening and sort of frightening moments. It's just really entertaining. I really enjoyed each Friday night sticking on an episode of The Boys as they came out. It was part of the ritual that got me through this year.
Yeah, it was very enjoyable as one of these shows that's kind of bringing back what I think Americans call appointment TV, this notion of actually watching something week by week as opposed to the binge thing we've been doing for a while. And even though I'm often quite bad at keeping up with it, I don't object to that coming back. I think there's something kind of fun about that. I think something like The Boys especially, where the pacing isn't too slow and it does actually have a big punchy cliffhangers, it does actually serve quite well for that. I think The Mandalorian did it well as well.
Yeah, there's been a few TV shows I've enjoyed watching this way this year. Star Trek Discovery, Mandalorian, certainly, yeah. I mean, I think The Boys is the most successful thing on Amazon Prime. Again, it's a thing that lots of people, if I'm talking about, people been saying, oh yes, I really enjoyed this. I think it's definitely the kind of the thing that Amazon Prime have that's captured the zeitgeist this year. Again,
as somebody who's known the comic for a long time, it's somewhat surprising to me that this is the thing that just, I don't know what to say, put Amazon Prime on the map, because I think people had heard of Amazon before that. But yeah. Somehow. But yeah, I think it is interesting that it's the first of their shows that has become a big zeitgeisty thing. And I remarked earlier that there hasn't been a big zeitgeisty show that everyone watches. But if I had to take a stab at what the big zeitgeisty shows at the moment are, it's probably this and The Mandalorian.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. These are definitely the shows that, at least amongst my circle, I've seen people talking about the most.
I don't know if it's as big as Game of Thrones, but it's certainly one of the bigger ones currently going.
And it is really, I think, has something to say about, media, entertainment, and how much we just hate each other right now.
Well, yeah, that was the part that surprised me, actually. It's obviously not a shock that The Boys has stuff to say, satirising current media trends and superhero media. But the way it sort of tapped into the weird undercurrent of hate in the modern world is probably what really put it over the top in feeling relevant and bleakly timely this year. Hey.
Yeah, the depressing moment. My second favourite TV show of the year is one that's already been on Nick's list, which is Better Call Saul. A show I absolutely adore. Some points can be just so quiet, understated, but then just builds to these inexorable moments of tension, especially the final few episodes of this season had some great confrontations that were just, you weren't able to look away from. Yeah, really, really gripping TV. Bob Odenkirk especially has done phenomenal work with the character, really fleshing him out, making him a three-dimensional person, and I'm very interested to see what they do with the final series.
Yeah, obviously, I like this too. This was my number 4. It's compelling to watch, partly because I was sort of thinking about this when you mentioned it earlier. The difference between this and Breaking Bad is, if anything, you actually like Jimmy/Saul a bit more than you liked Walt, especially at this point in the show. Walt's journey was mostly just becoming a bigger and bigger twat, whereas Jimmy and Miguel has maintained a certain sympathy, even as he has also become more and more embroiled in the underworld, which makes you almost more invested to see what awful thing will happen to him.
Yeah, I get the horrible feeling he's headed for a big fall, a big hard fall at some point, but there's a lot of tension. I thought it would have happened by now, but it's not, so yeah, it's going to happen though, and I suppose with the next series being the last series?
Yes, one more season left.
So obviously, yeah, something dramatic's going to happen.
It's going to be bad. I can't wait. Okay, and the number 1, I sense we are again headed for Parasite-esque consensus here.
Yes.
The number 1 TV show of the year. We talked about it for most of a whole long episode earlier in the year. We, I think, went on and on about how much we were looking forward to that episode for quite a lot beforehand. It is, of course, Netflix's German sci-fi epic Dark, the time travel drama about families, incest, and the apocalypse. Because apparently nothing makes a good surreal premium TV show like incest and the apocalypse. Hello, Twin Peaks. Yeah, this is great. This is one of those involving intelligent epic that I found. I watched the whole 3 seasons in a single basically run of about 2 months because that felt like the way I would, be able to keep the most of it in my head. And I feel okay about that decision. I think I had a good time.
Yeah, it won't surprise anyone to know that I agree. Dark is also my favourite TV show of the year. Yeah, it's a phenomenal piece of writing that's really, really intricately written and plotted with some great characterization. I watched the first 2 series last year, but then this year I rewatched series 1 and 2 in the weeks before series 3 came out to remind me of all the plot and characters and twists and turns. And there's a lot of stuff that I hadn't got straight in my head, which really benefited from revisiting just before the final series came out, which did not disappoint. It added more complexity to the universe, but also at the same time kind of developed it more, answered some questions, and built to what was a understated but very satisfying conclusion.
Yeah, even though it always felt like they had a pretty solid idea of where they were going, I don't want to say surprised, but I was very satisfied by how well they pulled everything together into a tight knot. And it was very literally a knot. That was what they kept calling it in the show.
Yeah.
Beautifully done.
Yeah, the fact they managed to pay off something as complex and, and far-reaching as this is just astonishing. And some great performances and some characters that we've learned to love over the 3 series got some nice endings, which I really appreciated.
Yes, and they were also willing to deliver some quite mercilessly grim endings for some of them, which I also appreciated.
Yeah.
So yeah, we recommended this hard early in the year, but we're going to do it again now.
Definitely.
It's all on Netflix. Watch Dark.
I also just want to pause for a moment to reflect that both our top film of the year and top TV show of the year are non-English language films and TV. So there's a lot of great content out there. A lot of it also made available because of the ubiquity of streaming platforms. There is a lot of great content out there not in English that's really worth diving into.
Yeah, this is probably the most foreign language TV I've watched since we were all watching The Killing and Borgen back in the late aughts. So yeah, it's interesting to see it making some kind of comeback in the streaming era, along with, Biohackers and Home for Christmas. I also watched this year. Neither of them quite made the top 10, although Home for Christmas was on the shortlist. I know you've watched even fucking more foreign language TV than that. So yeah, it's definitely having a small moment.
Yeah, exactly, which is great. I think we've got a real diversity of content across these top 5 TV shows. We've mentioned there's everything from comic adaptations to foreign language stuff to crime and domestic dramas. So yeah, we've got a good range. I guess now is the time we need to come together for consensus.
Once again, I don't think it's going to be a hard quest for consensus.
No, Dark is clearly number 1.
Yes, and then, the only other shows we both mentioned were Better Call Saul and Bounty Hunters, and in the same order. So
yeah, and I'm very happy with that as the MFV top 3 TV shows of the year. They're all excellent shows.
Well, that's cool. So top 3 shows of the year, it's Teenage Bounty Hunters number 3, Better Call Saul at number 2, and at number 1, of course, it's Dark. I probably recommend all of those things. Had Alistair listed The Boys instead of Teenage Bounty Hunters, it might have been more of an argument, but he didn't. So The Boys can be a firm runner-up.
Definitely. And the top 3 are all Netflix shows. So even in the era of streaming wars, it shows that Netflix is still in the dominant position.
Yeah, I don't think that's a huge surprise to anyone, but yeah, it's still all about the Netflix, as we've joked many times during the year. Yeah. However, it's time for the worst TV show of the year, and Netflix are going to take at least a small hit from me on this.
Yep, mine's also a Netflix show. That's in the worst TV shows of the year.
I'm going to guess we may once again be in lockstep here, because we really haven't... Actually, no, maybe not. I don't know. I'll go first. My worst TV show of the year was Blood of Zeus. I did not like it.
No, I did not like it either, and it was a close runner-up for worst TV show of the year.
Oh, fuck me.
So yeah, there is slight disagreement here, although I'm not going to disagree with you that Blood of Zeus was a bit of a letdown. The thing I found the most disappointing was Transformers War for Cybertron Siege.
Oh god. Yeah.
A TV show that didn't need 3 titles.
Yeah, I didn't aggressively dislike this as much as you did, but I must admit it was not great.
Yeah, both shows suffered from just being kind of dull, ponderous, lacking characters that you could really connect with emotionally, lots of exposition-heavy dialogue and plots that were tedious to nonsensical.
For some reason, I was able to engage with the Transformers stuff very slightly. I don't know, maybe just I liked the characters in those comics I read, but Blood of Zeus I found very hard to find any way into. It was just a load of people saying and doing stuff, and by the end especially, it just really just descended into generic action movie noise. I did not like it at all. I gather some people did like it, and this is not necessarily an easy barn door target to take a shot at, but I didn't think it was particularly good.
No, I mean, it was just mainly just dull. It wasn't offensively bad. I just find it quite dull and sort of as a TV show with characters that were very two-dimensional Definitely one to avoid. Both of those, in fact.
And I'm guessing you won't be watching the second series of Transformers War for Cybertron that they've just dropped.
No, I had noticed that Netflix was trying to get me to watch it because Netflix doesn't know what I liked, it just knows what I watched. But no, I don't think I'm going to be digging into the second series of that, unless for some reason it's radically different from the first, which I think is unlikely.
There you go, listeners. It's an exclusive insight into things we won't be covering in the next couple of episodes. Okay, and that was Moderate Fantasy Violence for this weekend, and indeed for 2020. Thank you for listening. We will push onwards into the future next episode. But yeah, for now, if you want to hear any more 2020 summary coverage from us, you can go to moderatefantasyviolence.com, where you can read my full top 10 TV shows of this year, and also Alistair's Year in Film article, as well as, of course, all our previous episodes, deleted scenes, other essays, etc. And if you've enjoyed the episode and you want to help us improve our lives and find still more listeners, then why not go to iTunes or other podcast services and leave a nice review. Thank you.
You can also find us on Twitter, where we're at MFV Podcast, or find us on Facebook by searching for Moderate Fantasy Violence. You can find more from me, Alistair Ball, on Twitter, where I'm at Alistair J.R. Ball, and you can find more of my writing at redtrainblog.com.
And I've been Nick Bryant. You can follow me on Twitter at NickMB, or you can find out more about my various comic writing endeavours and other stuff at nickbryant.com. And we'll be back here on this podcast next fortnight. Sure. And we will be covering a 2020 film, too late for those best of lists, which is Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, the final performance by Chadwick Boseman. And we will also be covering the balance of the season of Star Trek Discovery, which finishes in the next couple of weeks. So yep, join us in a couple of weeks for that. And until then, thank you very much for listening and for joining us through however much of 2020 you joined us for. Cheers. Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, no, this is probably the year I've watched the most non-English language content since the Killers Borgen era of Killers. No, that's
the band.
The Killing, and its single, Mr. Sweater Side. I don't fucking know. Anyway, yeah, this is probably the most streaming telly I've watched since the golden age of the Killers. Oh, fuck off, Nick. This is the worst. Yeah, this is probably the most.
Sorry, I'm not. I'm not laughing at you. I'm just laughing. Also, partly the image of the members of the Killers wearing those Norwegian jumpers over their spangly outfits that they wear when they perform.
I feel like they could pull it off.